In a relational database, we've got one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships, and that's exactly what we're going to build and implement today in a .NET 9 Web API, and of course, we're using Entity Framework with code-first migrations. Now, let's have a quick look here. After you click the like button, we have a video game API. Check out the info card because there you will find the complete video or course where we're going to build this web API with the video game model here. And as you can already see, this video game model, it's not really perfect because we've got an ID and a title, that's fine. But regarding the platform, the developer, and the publisher, for instance, there are ways to improve this. Because when we have a look at the database, here now you see these are our games so far. Spider-Man 2, Legend of Zelda, and Cyberpunk. But what if we've got another game made by Insomniac, for instance, or where the publisher is Sony Interactive Entertainment? Then we have duplicate values there, and this is not the best design regarding relational databases. So let's improve this today. Real quick, if you want to level up your skills with .NET and Blazor, now is the time to join the .NET Web Academy. You get over 40 hours of pure learning content. We cover things like clean architecture and CQRS. We dive really deep into all the new render modes of Blazor. You will learn how to publish your web applications with the help of GitHub Actions and Azure, and you get access to our community and the brand new Discord server with live collabs. So make sure to use the link in the video description below for a huge discount. I'm really looking forward to seeing you inside the academy. Quick recap, we have this model here, and then pretty simple actually. We've got a database context made with Entity Framework. We seeded some data. Again, regarding the details, check out the other videos on my channel, how we made this. And then we also have a video game controller with all CRUD operations. Again, we did this together in another video. But today now, I really want to improve the model, the video game model here, so that we got separate models for the developers and the publishers, for instance, and new stuff like the details for our one-to-one relationship, and then also genres for a many-to-many. And now you know that developer and publisher could be something for a one-to-many relationship. So let's do this right now. I would like to structure this a bit differently, just meaning to move the video game model here to a separate models folder. So let's create this one real quick, because now we will have new models or more models than just the video game model. So let's move that. And yes, we also changed the namespace. So now we've got our project a bit cleaner. Let's just say we save everything. And now the first thing I would like to add is a one-to-one relationship, meaning that every video game will also have video game details. Again, we could just add it here, of course, or we make everything a bit cleaner and have a separate model for these details. So for that, in our models folder, we create a new item and we call this video game details. And to save you time, let me just copy the properties. All right, there's now the ID, a description, and a release date of a game, but then we need something else, and this will then be the foreign key, so the primary key of the video game. So when we, for instance, write prop, then the integer ID, and call this thing video game ID, this is what we need. One more hint, we could also add the video game property there directly, like now video game, right? And then call this thing also a video game. But then in this specific case, we have to pay attention when we then get the data, because it could be the case, well, in this case, it would be certain that this leads to a circular dependency, and well, an error will happen. And I will show you that later in this video here when we implement the last relationship, the many-to-many relationship. But first, let's focus on the one-to-many. So we have our video game model with an ID, title, platform, developer, publisher, and then the video game details with an ID, description, release date, and the video game ID, but we are not done yet. We also have to put the video game details now also to the actual video game. So here again, we add another property. Now call this video game details. This can be null, and then we call this video game details for instance. All right, one more thing. It is technically not really necessary, but in here we've got our DB set, right? So now when I enter the video game details like that, and also call this video game details, for one, we make sure, also fix this here, video game details, all right? For one, we make sure that the table that will be created with the help of code first migrations is called video game details. Otherwise, it may be called video game details, something like that. Well, the model is called details, so it would probably also be called video game details, but Entity Framework is doing its own thing. For instance, when we would not set the name here for video games, then probably the table name would be just video game. This is just a tiny detail. And the other thing is when we move to the controller here, and then we only have the DB set video games, then this is the only thing that we can access here in our context. But now, if you want to query the video game details, it is also available there in the context. Otherwise, if you would leave out the DB set, you would still get the table, but we are not able to access the video game details directly. All right, long story short, let's just save everything and then run migrations. And here now, what I would like to do is first add a new migration with add migration and then video game details relationship, for instance, like that. So with that now another build started and we should get another migration file. All right, build succeeded. And as you can see here now, the video game details table will be created with the columns ID, description, release date, and the video game ID. We get a primary key and, very important now, also the foreign key. So only with the help of a primary key and the foreign key, this relationship is possible. And as you can see, the foreign key will be the ID of the video games table. And in case we want to roll back this migration, we see that simply the video game details table will be removed. So let's now update the database and then have a quick look at SQL Server Management Studio. There we are. So these are our video games. Refresh the database. There it is. Please ignore the blazing block and time tracker database. These are from the .NET Web Academy, link in the video description. But now here we see also the video game details table with these columns. And here you also see the video game ID is our foreign key. Now, of course, we can edit this and now say here, for instance, for the description, awesome game, almost like that. We have a release date, October 20th, for our first game, which is Spider-Man 2 here. Now, again, have a look at the video games here. Nothing actually changed, although we have the property in our model, right? So Entity Framework, it knows what's going on here. And now let's just try this, I would say. We restart the application. There we are using Scalar. We try to test this request, hit send, and we have the get call, but as you can see, the video game details are null. Now, why is that? Well, let's have a look at the code again. We see our video game model, which is or has the property video game details, which are nullable. Now in the controller, in our get call, get video games, get all video games in this case, we only get them, but since this new thing here is a navigation property, it is not loaded automatically. So we have to tell our application Entity Framework, in essence, to load the details as well when we want to get or see all the video games. So this can be done with the include function. Let me put this here. And now here I can say include. And as you can see here, specifies related entities to include in the query results. The navigation property to be included is specified starting with the type of entity being queried. So in the end, we add a lambda expression here, and G for game, for instance, we just say, I want the video game details. Please show me them as well. And when we now restart the application, go back to the browser, we can actually already hit send here. And you can see it here now. These are the video game details. ID is 1. The video game ID is 1. So this is our relationship, right? We say the description is just awesome game, and we got the release date. And that's it. This is our first relationship, the one-to-one relationship. Now let's continue with the one-to-many. Now what I want to do here is this thing, the developer and the publisher, for instance. It's in essence exactly the same thing, but it's the other way around. So not one game has many developers, it's one developer has many games. So how would we do that? First, we need another model. So here now we add a new item, call this developer. And now here, correct, we got an ID and also indeed a name for the actual developer. Let's make this required maybe, like that. All right, and then the same thing for the publisher, so that you really see how this works. Really, it is in essence the same thing. So here now ID again, and then we go to the publisher, this thing here. All right, and now one option we have is we could now also add a list of video games directly here into the publisher and the developer models or the entities, but it's not really necessary. We could also, again, run into a circular dependency, then we get an error when we want to get the data back. Of course, there are ways to fix this. We could use an attribute like JSON ignore, or we can use DTOs that map our stuff from this entity to another model, a data transfer model. But let's just stick to it. What we now have to change is this thing. We have the developer and the publisher as a string here, but now we need the model and also again the ID. So here now, again, instead of the string, we say prop int and then the developer ID, and then another property, which is the actual developer and also the developer here. And we can make this nullable so the warning is gone. And then let me just add some space here, and then do exactly the same thing for the publisher. So now here we say publisher ID, and then here, of course, we need our publisher object, and we also call this publisher like that. So again, the video game has a reference to the developer with the developer ID. This is the foreign key again, which is the primary key of the developer type. And here in the developer, we only have the ID and the name, and exactly the same thing for the publisher. Again, technically, we don't have to add this to our DB context. Let's just see what Entity Framework will do. We could add the or a table for developers and publishers, but let's just see what is happening. One more thing that I can see now, of course, is that seeding the data, what we did in the video before, is not working anymore because this is not a string that we can just set. So let's just remove this, that, and also here. All right, and now let's add another migration. So here now we write add migration again, developer publisher relationship, like that. Now it's getting interesting because you see the warning here. An operation was scaffolded that may result in the loss of data. Please review the migration for accuracy. Definitely we will lose some data here because we removed columns, we removed properties. As you can see here, when we apply this migration, we will drop the columns developer and publisher in our video games table, but we will add the developer ID and the publisher ID. But Entity Framework will not match this automatically because we have no data in this table here, the developer table, and also in the publisher table. So we have to add this data back. And apart from that, as you can see here, things will be updated. This just means that our new values for the developer ID and the publisher ID will be 0, key value for the ID. So for the game with the ID 1, 2, and 3 will be 0, the developer ID and the publisher ID. But we can change this, of course, or we could also make this nullable. All right, I think this is the most important stuff. What else we got? We have some indexes. To be more precise, we see that the developer ID and the publisher ID will be foreign keys. And in the down case, so when we roll back this migration, well, we will just undo everything we did with applying this migration. But let's just try this and say update database. We get an error, and this is why I assume the ID is not nullable. So let's just try that real quick. In the video game model, we say this is also nullable, like that. We roll back the migration. So now remove migration. So the last one will be removed. We shouldn't have the file anymore. Yep, try this one more time. You see we have no default or new values for, well, there they are null. Let's just try that. And then update database. and now it works. Thing is that the IDs, this is how I think, or what I think the reason was, we had set the values 0, but we have no developer or publisher with the ID 0. And since this is now a relationship where the primary key and the foreign keys have to match, maybe it's good that this happened. Here now you see it does not work that way, so it's better to keep this nullable because now we can fill in the values manually if we like. So this seemed to work. Let's have a look at the database. And now here in the tables, video games, you see we've got the developer and the publisher table, and video games should look different now. See that we have the developer and the publisher, but the values are null. When we now say for the developer, we set this to Insomniac, for instance, and in the publisher case, let's just use Sony. And then here in the video games, we say Spider-Man got the developer with ID 1 and the publisher with ID 1, which is now Sony and or Insomniac and Sony. And now when we go back to our application, I'll restart this thing, and here try to get the data again, we should see that developer ID is 1 and the publisher ID is 1, which is correct, right? But what about the object? Well, maybe you already know how to fix this. When we go back to our controller, we can again include the publisher and the developer. So here now, this would be our developer navigation property and the publisher navigation property. We restart the application, go back here, we hit send again, and now you see we get Insomniac with ID 1 and Sony with ID 1 as well. So this now is our one-to-many relationship. And quick side note, as you can see here, the table names for developer and publisher are really developer and publisher, not developers and publishers, because we let Entity Framework do its thing automatically. But if you want to make sure that the name is different, then you have to add the DB set. All right, last relationship now is the many-to-many. For that, I would like to add a new one, a new property, which is the genre. So here now, we add a new model, and this is now the genre like that. You could also use the platform, but genre is missing, so let me just add the genre here. And again, we add the ID and also the name, and now we need another navigation property, and this is the list of video games. So prop, and now here this is a list of video game. Let's make this nullable, because maybe a genre has no list or no single video game so far. So now let's call this video games, and let's also add a required to the name of the genre. And now the counterpart is the video game model. There it is. And here now we add another property, and this is also a list, but this time of genre, like that. And we call this genres. All right, and this also could be null when we don't want to add a genre here. So with that, we've got a list on the video game type, on the video game entity, and also a list on the genre entity. So list and list, many to many. The important thing here is that we need a joining table for that, meaning we got a table video games, then we will have a table genre, and then also something like genre video game, where it gives us just a pair of the video game ID and the genre ID. Great thing is Entity Framework can do this by its own. This was not always the case, but let's just add the migration first, and then you'll see what I mean. So add migration genre relationship. Make sure to save everything, and hopefully this thing works now. All right, we've got our file. Again, as you can see, table name is genre, not genres, because we didn't add the DB set, but we got the ID and the name and the primary key. And now also this is the joining table, genre video game, where we have a genres ID and the video games ID. So these two are foreign keys, but in the actual tables, of course, these are then the primary keys of the genre and also of the video game. All right, this is it. And now let's update the database again. Perfect. So now we can actually already restart the application, but also add something here in the tables. So we refresh this thing. And now here you see genre video game and genre. Let's add something here. For instance, we've got an action game, adventure maybe, and first-person shooter game. And now here in the genre video game, let's double check and we close this and this. We see Spider-Man is ID 1, which is an action adventure in the end. And for the genre, action adventure is 1 and 2. So now here in the joining table, we add genre 1 for game 1. And adventure is ID 2, also for game 1. And Cyberpunk is video game 3, and genre is then also 3. And we could say for Zelda, this is an adventure game, maybe also an action adventure game. These are our pairs, let's say. And now let's just try to run this. In Scala again, we test the request, we hit send, and what's happening? Nothing, because again we have to include this. Let's go back to Visual Studio. In the controller we include now the genres, restart our app, and now here let's hit send again. And this is the error I was talking about. So here now we get something crazy. When we check out the terminal here, it should say here a possible object cycle was detected. This can either be due to a cycle or if the object depth is larger than the maximum allowed depth of 32. Now this just means when we have a look at our two models, we got the video game, where is it, or the genre, because I found it first. The genre has a list of video games. The game has a list of genres. The genres has a list of video games. I think you get what I mean, right? So what can we do here? Well, we can use an attribute. For instance, for the genre, we just say JSON ignore and add the reference system text JSON serialization, restart the application. And this is telling our app now that we want to see the ID and the name in the result, but ignore the video games, right? Because otherwise it's a never-ending cycle. So now, hopefully for the last time, you go back to Scala, we hit send, and now we see Spider-Man 2 with Insomniac, Sony, the video game details, and the genres action and adventure. And Zelda is an adventure, and Cyberpunk is a first-person shooter, but also a role-playing game. But this is another topic. So this works, and if you want to know how to build the complete app now, meaning the first part with building the web API, building the first database with entity framework and code first migration, then I recommend you watch this video here you see on the screen.